Ecology and Wildlife. Course content. Introduction to Ecology and Wildlife. Ecosystems and their components. Energy flow and nutrient cycles. Habitats and ecological niches. Biodiversity and its importance. Wildlife species and their classifications. Adaptations and survival strategies. Threats to wildlife and ecosystems. Conservation strategies and protected areas. Human impact and sustainable practices. Climate change and its ecological impact. Wildlife laws and international agreements. Restoration ecology and rewilding. The future of ecology and wildlife conservation. Part 1. Introduction to Ecology and Wildlife. What is ecology? Ecology is the branch of biology that deals with the relationships between living organisms and their physical environment. It studies how organisms interact with one another, with other species, and with the non-living elements of their surroundings, such as air, water, and soil. At its core, ecology explores how life sustains itself and how ecosystems function. It spans from the study of microscopic bacteria in a drop of water to vast forest and ocean ecosystems. Key levels of ecological study include: organism, an individual living being; population, a group of organisms of the same species in a given area; community, all populations of different species living together in a defined area; ecosystem, a biological community and its physical environment functioning as a unit; biosphere, the global sum of all ecosystems, the zone of life on Earth. Understanding wildlife. Wildlife refers to all undomesticated plants, animals, and other organisms living in their natural habitats. It encompasses everything from the smallest insects to the largest mammals, from forest trees to deep-sea fish. Wildlife plays a crucial role in maintaining ecological balance and biodiversity. Every species, no matter how small, has a role to play in the intricate web of life. For instance, pollinators like bees and butterflies support plant reproduction. Predators help control prey populations. Scavengers and decomposers aid in nutrient recycling. Importance of ecology and wildlife. Understanding ecology and conserving wildlife are essential for several reasons. Environmental health. Healthy ecosystems provide clean air, water, and fertile soil. Biodiversity conservation. Preserving a wide variety of life forms ensures resilience against environmental changes. Sustainable development. Ecology informs how we can use natural resources wisely without depleting them for future generations. Climate regulation. Forests, oceans, and wetlands regulate the Earth's climate and carbon cycles. Cultural and economic value. Many cultures value wildlife spiritually and culturally, and many communities rely on ecotourism and natural resources for livelihoods. Human relationship with nature. Historically, human societies coexisted with nature, depending on wildlife for food, clothing, medicine, and shelter. However, with industrialization and urban expansion, human activities have increasingly threatened natural ecosystems. Understanding ecology helps bridge the gap between human development and nature conservation. It fosters awareness that humans are not separate from ecosystems, but an integral part of them. The need for ecological awareness. In a time of accelerating biodiversity loss, deforestation, pollution, and climate change, the need for ecological literacy has never been greater. Learning about ecology and wildlife encourages responsible behavior, inspires conservation action, and empowers people to make informed decisions for a sustainable future. Key takeaways. Ecology studies the relationships among organisms and their environment. Wildlife includes all undomesticated organisms and plays a vital role in ecosystems. Ecological understanding is crucial for environmental protection and sustainable development. Conservation of wildlife is essential for maintaining biodiversity and ecological balance. Part 2: Ecosystems and their components. What is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is a community of living organisms, plants, animals, and microbes, interacting with each other and with their non-living environment, air, water, minerals, climate, in a specific area. It functions as a unit, where energy flows and nutrients cycle to support life. Ecosystems can be natural, like forests, oceans, and grasslands, or artificial, like urban parks, aquariums, and agricultural lands. Components of an ecosystem. An ecosystem consists of two major components. Abiotic components, living things. These include all living organisms in an ecosystem. They can be classified based on their roles in the food chain. Producers, autotrophs. These are green plants and some bacteria that make their own food through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Consumers, heterotrophs, organisms that consume other organisms for energy. They include primary consumers, herbivores; secondary consumers, carnivores; tertiary consumers, top predators; omnivores, organisms that eat both plants and animals; decomposers, fungi, bacteria, and detritivores that break down dead organisms, recycling nutrients back into the ecosystem. Abiotic components, non-living things. These include all physical and chemical elements of the environment that affect the living organisms. Climate, temperature, precipitation, sunlight. Soil, texture, minerals, pH. Water, availability, salinity, flow. Air, composition, quality. Topography, elevation, slope. Types of ecosystems. Ecosystems vary widely in size and type. Major types include terrestrial ecosystems. Forests, dense vegetation, rich biodiversity, and carbon sinks. Deserts, arid environments with extreme temperatures and drought-resistant organisms. Grasslands dominated by grasses support grazing herbivores. Tundras, cold climates, short-growing seasons, permafrost. Aquatic ecosystems. Freshwater, lakes, rivers, ponds, and wetlands. Marine, oceans, coral reefs, estuaries, largest and most diverse ecosystems. Energy flow in ecosystems. Energy enters the ecosystem through sunlight, which is captured by producers via photosynthesis. It flows through the ecosystem in one direction. Sun right-pointing arrow producers, right-pointing arrow consumers, right-pointing arrow decomposers. At each level, some energy is lost as heat, making energy flow unidirectional and inefficient. This is represented in ecological pyramids of energy, biomass, and numbers. Nutrient cycling. Ecosystems recycle essential nutrients through biogeochemical cycles. Carbon cycle, movement of carbon through the atmosphere, organisms, and Earth. Nitrogen cycle, nitrogen fixation, nitrification, and decomposition. Water cycle, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and infiltration. Phosphorus cycle, transfer of phosphorus through rocks, water, soil, and living organisms. These cycles maintain ecosystem health and productivity. Ecosystem stability and dynamics. Ecosystems are dynamic. They constantly change due to internal interactions and external disturbances like climate events or human impact. An ecosystem's stability depends on resilience, its ability to recover from disturbance. Resistance, its ability to remain unchanged during stress. Biodiversity, more diverse ecosystems tend to be more stable and productive. Key takeaways. An ecosystem is a unit of living organisms and their physical environment functioning together. It has biotic, living, and abiotic, non-living components. Energy flows one way, while nutrients cycle through ecosystems. Ecosystems can be terrestrial or aquatic, each with unique features. Stability and health depend on resilience, resistance, and biodiversity. Part 3: Energy Flow and Nutrient Cycles. Introduction. Ecosystems rely on a continuous flow of energy and the recycling of nutrients to maintain life. While energy flows in one direction, typically from the sun through producers to consumers and decomposers, nutrients are constantly cycled through various components of the ecosystem. Understanding these processes is crucial for grasping how ecosystems function and sustain life. Energy flow in ecosystems. A. The source of energy. The sun is the primary source of energy for most ecosystems. Through the process of photosynthesis, green plants producers capture solar energy and convert it into chemical energy stored in glucose and other organic compounds. B. Trophic levels. Energy flows through different levels in an ecosystem, known as trophic levels. Producers, autotrophs, plants and algae that convert sunlight into energy. Primary consumers, herbivores that eat producers. Secondary consumers, carnivores that eat herbivores. Tertiary consumers, higher-level carnivores. Decomposers break down dead matter, returning nutrients to the soil. See food chains and food webs. A food chain is a linear sequence showing who eats whom in an ecosystem. A food web is a more complex and realistic network of interconnected food chains showing multiple predator-prey relationships. D. Ecological pyramids. Energy flow and biomass can be illustrated using ecological pyramids. Pyramid of energy shows energy available at each trophic level always upright. Pyramid of biomass represents total mass of organisms, can vary depending on ecosystem. Pyramid of numbers displays the number of organisms at each level. Only 10% of energy is typically transferred from one level to the next. The rest is lost as heat, metabolism, or waste. This is known as the 10% law. Nutrient cycles in ecosystems. Unlike energy, nutrients are recycled within ecosystems through biogeochemical cycles. These cycles ensure the continual availability of essential elements. A. The carbon cycle. Carbon is exchanged among the atmosphere, organisms, oceans, and soil. Photosynthesis removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Respiration, decomposition, and combustion return carbon dioxide. Human activities like burning fossil fuels and deforestation have disrupted this cycle, contributing to climate change. B. The nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is essential for proteins and DNA, but must be fixed to be usable by plants. Nitrogen fixation by bacteria or lightning converts atmospheric N into usable forms. Nitrification and assimilation by plants make nitrogen available to animals. Decomposition and denitrification return nitrogen to the atmosphere. C. The water cycle. Driven by solar energy and gravity. Includes evaporation, condensation, precipitation, infiltration, and runoff. Regulates climate and supports all life processes. D. The phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is vital for DNA, RNA, and ATP. Unlike other cycles, it does not involve the atmosphere. Moves through rocks, soil, water, and organisms. Often a limiting nutrient in freshwater systems, leading to eutrophication when overloaded. Human influence on energy flow and nutrient cycles. Human activities have significantly impacted these natural cycles. Deforestation reduces carbon sequestration. Fossil fuel combustion increases atmospheric carbon dioxide. Agricultural runoff disrupts nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, causing water pollution. Overfishing and habitat destruction alter food webs. Key takeaways. Energy flows one way in ecosystems, from the sun to producers to consumers and decomposers. Only about 10% of energy is passed between trophic levels. Nutrients like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and water are recycled through biogeochemical cycles. Human activities are disrupting both energy flow and nutrient cycles, with serious ecological consequences. Part 4: Habitats and Ecological Niches. Introduction. Every organism lives in a specific environment suited to its survival. The habitat is where an organism lives, while its ecological niche is the role it plays within that environment. Understanding both concepts is fundamental to ecology, as they help explain species interactions, competition, and biodiversity. What is a habitat? A habitat is the natural home or environment of an organism. It provides the essential components needed for survival: food, water, shelter, space to reproduce and grow. Types of habitats. Habitats vary widely depending on the ecosystem. Common types include forest habitat, dense trees, rich soil, high biodiversity. Desert habitat, arid with temperature extremes and drought-adapted species. Grassland habitat, open lands with grasses suited for grazing animals. Aquatic habitat includes freshwater, rivers, lakes, and marine oceans estuary systems. Mountain habitat, varying altitudes and temperatures, supporting specialized flora and fauna. Organisms are usually adapted to the specific conditions of their habitats. For example, polar bears thrive in the Arctic tundra, while cacti are adapted to deserts. Microhabitats. Within a habitat, smaller subdivisions exist called microhabitats, like under a rock, inside tree bark, or within soil layers. These offer specific conditions, e.g., moisture, shade, suitable for certain organisms like fungi, insects, or amphibians. What is an ecological niche? An ecological niche describes how a species interacts with the biotic and abiotic components of its environment. It encompasses the food it eats, where and when it feeds, its reproductive strategy, how it avoids predators, its role in energy flow and nutrient cycling. Niche versus habitat. Habitat is the address where an organism lives. Niche is the profession or role the organism performs in the ecosystem. For example, in a forest, an owl's habitat is the tree canopy. Its niche includes being a nocturnal predator, controlling rodent populations. Fundamental versus realized niche. Fundamental niche, the full range of conditions an organism could occupy in the absence of competition or threats. Realized niche, the actual conditions and roles an organism does occupy due to biotic interactions, e.g., competition, predation. Niche differentiation and coexistence. When multiple species share a habitat, competition for resources can occur. To reduce conflict, species undergo niche differentiation. They adapt to use different resources or occupy slightly different ecological roles. This enables coexistence and promotes biodiversity. Examples: different bird species feeding at various heights on the same tree. Herbivores in savannas grazing on different types of vegetation. Specialist versus generalist species. Specialists have narrow niches and specific habitat requirements, e.g., koalas feed only on eucalyptus leaves. Generalists have broad niches and can survive in various environments, e.g., raccoons, which eat a wide range of foods and live in diverse settings. Specialists are more vulnerable to environmental changes, while generalists are more adaptable. Keystone species. A keystone species plays a critical role in maintaining the structure of an ecosystem. Its niche supports many other species, and its removal can cause dramatic changes. Example: sea otters control sea urchin populations, which helps preserve kelp forest habitats. Key takeaways. A habitat is where an organism lives. A niche is its role in the ecosystem. Organisms adapt to specific habitats and fill niches based on their needs and interactions. Niche differentiation helps reduce competition and supports biodiversity. Specialists are more vulnerable to change, while generalists are more resilient. Keystone species have outsized impacts on ecosystem stability. Part 5: Biodiversity and its importance. What is biodiversity? Biodiversity, short for biological diversity, refers to the variety of life on Earth. It encompasses the diversity of species, genetic variation within species, and the variety of ecosystems they form. Biodiversity is the foundation of ecosystem health, resilience, and the essential services that nature provides to humanity. Levels of biodiversity. Biodiversity is studied at 3 primary levels. A. Genetic diversity. Variation of genes within a species determines how a species adapts to environmental changes. Example: different breeds of dogs or various strains of rice. B. Species diversity. The variety of species within a region. Higher species diversity increases ecological stability. Example: coral reefs and tropical rainforests have high species diversity. C. Ecosystem diversity. Diversity of ecosystems, e.g., forests, wetlands, deserts, includes the interactions among species and between species and their environment. Importance of biodiversity. Biodiversity is crucial to life on Earth for the following reasons. A. Ecological balance. Each species has a role: producers, consumers, decomposers. Biodiversity ensures natural sustainability and ecological stability. B. Ecosystem services. Biodiversity supports a wide range of ecosystem services. Provisioning: food, water, fuel, medicine. Regulating: climate control, disease regulation, water purification. Cultural: spiritual, aesthetic, and recreational value. Supporting: nutrient cycling, soil formation, pollination. C. Economic value. Agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and pharmaceuticals rely on biodiversity. Biodiversity-rich areas attract tourism, providing income for local communities. D. Scientific and educational value. Study of diverse species leads to discoveries in medicine, biotechnology, and agriculture. Preserves indigenous knowledge and natural heritage. Biodiversity hotspots. A biodiversity hotspot is a region with high species richness and endemism, species found nowhere else, under threat from human activity. Examples: Amazon rainforest, Congo Basin, Western Ghats and Himalayas, India, Coral Triangle, Southeast Asia. Conservation efforts are often prioritized in these areas to prevent irreversible loss. Threats to biodiversity. Biodiversity faces numerous threats, mostly due to human activity. Habitat destruction, deforestation, urbanization, agriculture. Pollution, air, water, and soil contamination. Climate change alters habitats and species migration. Invasive species, non-native species disrupt native ecosystems. Overexploitation, unsustainable hunting, fishing, and logging. These threats lead to species extinction, weakening ecosystem services and resilience. Conservation of biodiversity. Preserving biodiversity requires integrated and proactive strategies. In situ conservation. Protecting species in their natural habitats, e.g., national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. Ex situ conservation. Conserving species outside their habitats, e.g., zoos, seed banks, botanical gardens. Legislation and policy. Environmental laws, biodiversity acts, and international treaties, e.g., Convention on Biological Diversity. Community participation. Involving local communities in conservation efforts leads to better outcomes. Promotion of sustainable use of resources. Key takeaways. Biodiversity includes genetic, species, and ecosystem diversity. It supports ecological stability, economic development, and cultural values. Biodiversity hotspots are high-priority areas for conservation. Human activities are the leading cause of biodiversity loss. Conservation requires in situ and ex situ efforts, strong laws, and community involvement. Part 6. Wildlife species and their classifications. Introduction to wildlife. Wildlife refers to all undomesticated organisms, including animals, plants, fungi, and microorganisms that live in their natural environments. Wildlife plays a crucial role in maintaining ecological balance and contributes to ecosystem health, resilience, and sustainability. Conserving wildlife is essential for biodiversity, ecological processes, and human well-being. Classification of wildlife species. Wildlife species are classified based on various criteria such as their taxonomy, habitat, diet, conservation status, and role in the ecosystem. A. Taxonomic classification. Based on biological hierarchy, wildlife can be classified into major groups. Mammals, warm-blooded hairy animals that nourish young with milk, e.g. tigers, elephants. Birds, feathered winged animals, many capable of flight, e.g. eagles, parrots. Reptiles, cold-blooded animals with scales, e.g. snakes, lizards. Amphibians, cold-blooded animals that live in both water and land, e.g. frogs, salamanders. Fish, aquatic animals with fins and gills, e.g. salmon, sharks. Insects and arthropods, invertebrates with exoskeletons, e.g. butterflies, spiders. Plants and fungi include wild flora like orchids, ferns, and mushrooms. B. Habitat-based classification. Terrestrial wildlife, live on land, e.g. deer, leopards. Aquatic wildlife, live in water environments, e.g. dolphins, turtles. Aerial wildlife, adapted to flying or spending a significant time in the air, e.g. bats, birds. Amphibious wildlife, live in both water and land environments, e.g. crocodiles, frogs. C. Diet-based classification. Herbivores feed on plants, e.g. giraffes, rabbits. Carnivores feed on other animals, e.g. lions, wolves. Omnivores consume both plants and animals, e.g. bears, humans. Detritivores, scavengers, feed on dead organic matter, e.g. vultures, hyenas. Conservation status categories. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, classifies species based on their risk of extinction. Extinct X, no known individuals remaining. Extinct in the wild, EU, survive only in captivity. Critically endangered, crossing, extremely high risk of extinction. Endangered, N, very high risk of extinction in the near future. Vulnerable, VU, high risk of extinction in the medium term. Near threatened, NT, close to being at risk. Least concern, LC, no immediate threat of extinction. Data deficient, DD, insufficient data for assessment. Endemic and keystone species. Endemic species, found only in a specific geographic area and nowhere else. They are highly vulnerable to habitat changes. Example, Nilgiri tahr, India, lemurs, Madagascar. Keystone species have a disproportionately large effect on their ecosystem relative to their abundance. Example, sea otters, African elephants. Flagship and indicator species. Flagship species, iconic and charismatic species used to promote conservation campaigns. Example, giant panda, Bengal tiger. Indicator species reflect the health of an ecosystem. Their decline indicates environmental degradation. Example, amphibians indicate water quality, lichens indicate air pollution. Migratory and invasive species. Migratory species travel across regions or countries during certain seasons for breeding, feeding, or climate. Example, Arctic tern, monarch butterfly. Invasive species, non-native species that cause harm to the native ecosystem, economy, or human health. Example, water hyacinth, zebra mussel. Importance of classifying wildlife. Conservation planning helps prioritize species and habitats for protection. Ecological research, understanding relationships and roles within ecosystems. Monitoring environmental changes, detecting shifts in species populations, signals ecological disturbances. Legislative protection, classification informs national and international conservation policies. Key takeaways. Wildlife includes all non-domesticated organisms living in natural habitats. Classification can be based on taxonomy, habitat, diet, or conservation status. IUCN Red List helps identify species at risk of extinction. Endemic, keystone, flagship, and indicator species play crucial ecological and conservation roles. Migratory and invasive species impact ecosystems in different ways. Proper classification supports conservation, research, and environmental management. Part 7. Threats to wildlife and ecosystems. Introduction. Despite their resilience, ecosystems and wildlife around the world are facing unprecedented threats, many of which are a direct result of human activities. These threats disrupt the balance of nature, lead to species extinction, and undermine the ecological services that support life on Earth. Habitat loss and fragmentation. A. Habitat destruction. Caused by deforestation, urbanization, agriculture, mining, and infrastructure development. Leads to the disappearance of the natural living spaces of wildlife. B. Habitat fragmentation. Large habitats are divided into smaller isolated patches. Impacts migration, breeding, and food availability. Increases vulnerability to predators and human interference. Examples. Tropical rainforests being cleared for palm oil and cattle farming. Wetlands drained for urban expansion. Pollution. Pollution affects both terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, harming organisms and their habitats. A. Air pollution. Emissions from vehicles and industries degrade air quality. Acid rain alters soil and water pH, damaging forests and freshwater habitats. B. Water pollution. Industrial discharge, agricultural runoff, pesticides, fertilizers, and plastic waste poison aquatic life. Leads to eutrophication and dead zones. C. Soil pollution. Use of chemicals and waste dumping degrades soil fertility and impacts ground-dwelling species. D. Noise and light pollution. Affects migratory patterns, communication, and reproductive behavior of species like birds, bats, and turtles. Climate change. A. Global warming. Rising temperatures affect species distribution and ecosystem dynamics. Coral bleaching, glacial melting, and shifting vegetation zones are key indicators. B. Changing weather patterns. Unpredictable rainfall, droughts, and storms impact breeding and feeding cycles. C. Sea level rise. Destroys coastal ecosystems like mangroves and wetlands. Example, polar bears are threatened by melting Arctic ice, which reduces their hunting grounds. Overexploitation of resources. A. Overhunting and poaching. Targeted hunting for meat, trophies, and body parts, e.g. ivory, rhino horn, leads to population decline. B. Overfishing. Unsustainable fishing practices deplete marine biodiversity and disrupt food chains. C. Unsustainable logging and mining. Removes key species and disrupts forest ecosystems. Invasive alien species. Non-native species introduced, intentionally or accidentally, can outcompete native species, spread diseases, or alter habitats. Examples. Lantana camara, outcompeting native plants in India. Brown tree snake decimating bird populations in Guam. Human-wildlife conflict. Occurs when wildlife encroaches on human settlements due to habitat loss. Results in injury, crop damage, livestock loss, and retaliatory killing of animals. Common examples: elephants raiding farms, leopards entering urban areas, diseases and epidemics. Wildlife is increasingly affected by disease outbreaks, often exacerbated by climate change and habitat disturbances. Zoonotic diseases, e.g., COVID-19, highlight the link between wildlife health and human well-being. Unsustainable tourism and recreation disturbs wildlife behavior and habitats. Littering, noise, and habitat trampling degrade ecosystems. Irresponsible tourism practices in fragile areas, e.g., coral reefs, forests, cause long-term damage. Natural disasters. Although natural, events like floods, wildfires, and volcanic eruptions can cause sudden and severe damage to wildlife and ecosystems. Human-induced climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of such events. Key takeaways: wildlife and ecosystems face numerous threats, primarily from human activities. Habitat loss, pollution, climate change, and overexploitation are leading causes of biodiversity decline. Invasive species and human-wildlife conflict add pressure to already stressed environments. Addressing these threats requires global awareness, policy action, and sustainable practices. Part 8: Conservation Strategies and Protected Areas. Introduction. Conservation is the practice of protecting Earth's natural resources, its species, habitats, and ecosystems from degradation and extinction. As the pressures on the environment grow, both in situ, on-site, and ex situ, off-site strategies have become essential tools for safeguarding biodiversity and wildlife. Objectives of conservation: preserve biodiversity and prevent species extinction. Maintain ecosystem services and ecological processes. Protect genetic diversity for resilience and adaptation. Sustain natural resources for future generations. Ensure cultural and aesthetic value of nature. In situ conservation. This involves protecting species in their natural habitats, allowing them to live and evolve in their environment. Advantages: maintains natural interactions and evolutionary processes. Protects entire ecosystems, not just individual species. More cost-effective in the long term. B. Examples of in situ conservation. National parks, large areas set aside for conservation and public enjoyment, e.g., Yellowstone in the USA, Jim Corbett in India. Wildlife sanctuaries provide protection to wildlife with fewer restrictions on human activity. Biosphere reserves protect large landscapes with zones for conservation, research, and sustainable use. Sacred groves, forests conserved by indigenous communities for cultural or religious reasons. Community conserved areas, CCAs, locally managed and protected ecosystems. Ex situ conservation. This method involves conserving biological diversity outside natural habitats, especially for critically endangered species. Techniques. Zoos and aquariums house and breed threatened animals. Botanical gardens preserve diverse plant species. Seed banks and gene banks store genetic material for future use. Cryopreservation, freezing and storing reproductive materials like sperm and eggs. Captive breeding and reintroduction, breeding endangered species in captivity and releasing them into the wild, e.g., Arabian oryx, California condor. B. Advantages. Helps save species on the brink of extinction. Allows scientific research and public education. Serves as a genetic reservoir for restoration. Protected areas, categories and functions. Protected areas are designated regions with legal protection to conserve wildlife and habitats. IUCN Protected Area Categories. Strict Nature Reserve, highly protected, minimal human interference. National Park, ecosystem protection and recreation. Natural monument, specific natural features of ecological or cultural value. Habitat species management area, managed for specific species or habitats. Protected landscape seascape, harmonizes conservation with human use. Managed resource protected area, sustainable use of ecosystems. Role of local communities. Engaging local communities in conservation fosters sustainable use and stewardship. Joint Forest Management, JFM, collaboration between governments and communities to manage forests. Eco-development, livelihood generation tied to conservation goals. Traditional knowledge, indigenous practices contribute to resource sustainability. Legal and policy frameworks. Effective conservation requires strong laws and international cooperation. National legislation. Wildlife Protection Acts, e.g., India's Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Environmental Protection Acts. Forest Conservation Acts. International agreements. Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD. CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Challenges in conservation. Insufficient funding and manpower. Conflicts between development and conservation. Poaching and illegal wildlife trade. Climate change impacts. Lack of community participation. Integrated conservation approaches. Modern conservation efforts integrate ecological, social, and economic aspects. Landscape-level planning conserves entire ecosystems across political boundaries. Wildlife corridors connect fragmented habitats to enable species movement. Sustainable tourism promotes awareness and funding for conservation. Conservation education and awareness builds public support and responsible behavior. Key takeaways. Conservation is vital for protecting species and sustaining ecosystems. In situ conservation maintains wildlife in natural habitats. Ex situ strategies support critically endangered species. Protected areas are essential tools in conservation planning. Community involvement and legal frameworks enhance conservation effectiveness. Integrated and adaptive approaches are key to addressing modern conservation challenges. Part 9: Human-Wildlife Interaction and Conflict. Introduction. Humans and wildlife have coexisted for centuries, sharing landscapes, resources, and sometimes livelihoods. However, as human populations expand and natural habitats shrink, the interaction between people and wild animals has become increasingly tense and complex, often resulting in conflicts. Understanding the nature of these interactions is vital for sustainable coexistence and biodiversity conservation. Types of human-wildlife interactions. Human-wildlife interactions can be positive, neutral, or negative, depending on the context. A. Positive interactions. Ecotourism. Wildlife draws visitors, boosting local economies. Cultural significance. Animals and forests hold religious and traditional value. Ecosystem services. Wildlife contributes to pollination, pest control, and nutrient cycling. B. Negative interactions, conflicts. Crop damage. Herbivores such as elephants, deer, and wild boars raid agricultural fields. Livestock predation. Carnivores like leopards, wolves, and tigers prey on domestic animals. Property damage. Monkeys, elephants, and bears often damage homes and infrastructure. Human injuries and deaths. Encounters can be fatal for both people and animals. Causes of human-wildlife conflict, HWC. Several factors drive the increase in HWC. A. Habitat loss and fragmentation. Expansion of agriculture, infrastructure, and urbanization reduces wildlife space. B. Resource competition. Animals venture into human settlements in search of food and water due to declining resources in their habitats. C. Encroachment on wildlife corridors. Blocking traditional migration routes disrupts animal movement and forces them into human areas. D. Climate change. Alters availability of water and food, pushing wildlife into unfamiliar or populated zones. E. Human activities. Poaching, noise and pollution disturb natural behavior, causing animals to act aggressively or move unpredictably. Consequences of human-wildlife conflict. A. For humans. Economic loss due to crop and livestock destruction. Fear and reduced quality of life in affected communities. Retaliatory killings and resentment toward conservation efforts. B. For wildlife. Injury or death due to traps, poisoning, or hunting. Loss of habitat due to fencing, infrastructure, or land conversion. Disruption of breeding and migratory behaviors. Mitigation strategies. Effective mitigation requires a combination of policy, technology, education, and community involvement. A. Physical barriers and deterrence. Electric fences, trenches, and bee fences, using bees to deter elephants. Light, sounds, and scare devices. B. Land use planning. Maintaining wildlife corridors and buffer zones between forests and human settlements. Promoting agroforestry and sustainable land practices. C. Community involvement. Encouraging local stewardship through incentives and education. Forming rapid response teams to address conflict incidents quickly. D. Compensation schemes. Governments or NGOs provide financial compensation for verified wildlife-induced damages to reduce retaliation. E. Technology and surveillance. Use of GPS collars, drones, and camera traps to monitor wildlife movements and issue early warnings. Case studies. 1. India, elephant-human conflict. Common in northeastern and southern states due to habitat fragmentation. Mitigated using elephant corridors, compensation, and community awareness programs. 2. Africa, lion predation on livestock. Maasai communities implement predator-proof bomas, enclosures to protect livestock. Lion Guardians program trains locals to monitor lion movements and prevent attacks. 3. Sri Lanka, monkey menace in urban areas. Growing urban monkey populations lead to household damage. Managed through sterilization programs and relocation strategies. Balancing conservation and human needs. Inclusive conservation that respects the rights and needs of local communities is key. Education and awareness help change perceptions of wildlife as enemies. Sustainable development must integrate wildlife conservation into planning processes. Key takeaways. Human-wildlife interaction is increasing due to shrinking habitats and growing human populations. Conflicts result in damage to livelihoods, loss of wildlife, and weakened support for conservation. Solutions lie in community participation, technology, land management, and compensation mechanisms. Harmonizing conservation with development is essential for long-term coexistence. Part 10. Role of wildlife in ecosystems. Introduction. Wildlife is an integral part of ecosystems. Each species plays a unique role that contributes to the structure, function, and resilience of ecosystems. The loss of even a single species can trigger cascading effects, altering food webs, disrupting ecological processes, and threatening the stability of the environment. Wildlife and ecological balance. Wildlife maintains the balance of natural systems through complex interrelationships. Predator-prey dynamics help control population sizes and prevent overgrazing or overpopulation. Scavengers clean the environment by consuming dead organisms, reducing the spread of disease. Herbivores shape plant communities and promote vegetation dynamics. Example: Wolves in Yellowstone National Park helped restore ecosystem balance by controlling deer populations, which allowed forest vegetation to recover, a process known as a trophic cascade. Wildlife as pollinators. Many animals, especially insects and birds, are essential pollinators. Bees, butterflies, beetles, birds, and bats transfer pollen from one flower to another, facilitating plant reproduction. Over 75% of food crops depend on animal pollination. Ecological importance. Maintains plant diversity. Supports food production. Contributes to forest regeneration. Wildlife in seed dispersal. Animals contribute to the dispersal of seeds, aiding in plant propagation. Birds, bats, elephants, monkeys, and rodents consume fruits and disperse seeds through droppings. Ensures genetic diversity and forest regeneration. Example: hornbills are known as the farmers of the forest due to their role in dispersing seeds over wide areas. Wildlife as ecosystem engineers. Some species modify the environment in ways that benefit other organisms. Beavers build dams that create wetland habitats. Termites aerate soil and recycle nutrients. Elephants clear vegetation, creating pathways and open spaces for smaller species. These organisms shape the physical structure of ecosystems, increasing biodiversity and habitat diversity. Wildlife and nutrient cycling. Wildlife contributes to nutrient flow across ecosystems. Decomposers like fungi, earthworms, and certain insects break down organic matter. Large mammals transport nutrients across large distances through droppings. Aquatic species help in nitrogen and phosphorus cycling in rivers, lakes, and oceans. Wildlife and climate regulation. Forest animals contribute indirectly to carbon sequestration by supporting forest health. Marine wildlife like whales and krill aid in regulating oceanic carbon through biological processes such as the whale pump. Wildlife and disease regulation. Predators control populations of disease-carrying animals like rodents. Biodiversity buffers ecosystems against the spread of infectious diseases, a concept known as the dilution effect. Example: a decline in biodiversity can lead to an increase in Lyme disease transmission due to higher rodent populations. 10.9 Cultural, recreational, and spiritual value. Wildlife has immense cultural significance in art, mythology, and religious practices. Wildlife-based tourism and recreation support local economies and conservation funding. Provides inspiration and well-being to people around the world. 10.10 Consequences of wildlife loss. Disrupted ecosystems and food chains. Reduced ecosystem services such as pollination, clean air, and fertile soil. Increased vulnerability to climate change and natural disasters. Collapse of local livelihoods and cultural traditions. Key takeaways. Wildlife is essential to ecosystem functioning, biodiversity, and environmental health. Species perform roles such as pollination, seed dispersal, pest control, nutrient cycling, and climate regulation. Loss of wildlife leads to ecological imbalance and affects human well-being. Conserving wildlife means preserving life-supporting processes critical for the planet. Part 11. Wildlife Monitoring and Research Methods. Introduction. Wildlife monitoring and research are fundamental to understanding ecosystems, assessing conservation status, and guiding management decisions. Monitoring helps track changes in species populations, behaviors, movements, and habitats over time. Scientific methods and technologies play a crucial role in collecting accurate data to inform conservation strategies. Objectives of wildlife monitoring. Track population trends and species distribution. Assess health and behavior of species. Detect threats such as poaching, habitat degradation, or climate change. Evaluate effectiveness of conservation interventions. Provide baseline data for research and policy. Direct observation methods. A. Visual sighting. Observing wildlife in their natural habitats using binoculars, scopes, or the naked eye. Useful for species that are large, diurnal, and occur in open habitats. B. Line transect and point count surveys. Walk along predefined paths, transects, or remain stationary at specific points to record sightings. Commonly used for birds, mammals, and reptiles. C. Nest or den counts. Counting active nests or dens to estimate breeding population sizes, e.g., for sea turtles, birds. Indirect methods. When direct sightings are difficult, indirect signs are used. A. Camera trapping. Motion-activated cameras capture images of wildlife. Ideal for studying elusive, nocturnal, or rare species. Helps estimate population density using capture-recapture methods. B. Tracks and scat analysis. Footprints, droppings, and feeding marks help identify presence and activity. Scat can also provide DNA, dietary, and hormonal information. C. Call playback and acoustic monitoring. Used for vocal species like birds, frogs, and bats. Sound recorders can monitor species presence and behavior remotely. Tagging and tracking technologies. A. Radio telemetry. Uses radio transmitters to track animals over short distances. Requires manual tracking with receivers. B. GPS and satellite tracking. Collars or tags send real-time location data to satellites. Used for long-distance migratory species and wide-ranging animals, e.g. elephants, whales. C. PIT and RFID tags. Passive integrated transponders used for marking smaller animals like amphibians and fish. Scannable ID helps in individual tracking. Genetic and molecular techniques. A. DNA barcoding. Identifies species using genetic markers. Useful in identifying cryptic species or analyzing illegal wildlife products. B. Environmental DNA (EDNA). Detects DNA traces left by organisms in water, soil, or air. Non-invasive and effective for aquatic and elusive species. Aerial and drone surveys. Drones equipped with cameras or sensors survey large or inaccessible areas. Useful for monitoring wildlife populations, habitat conditions, and poaching activity. Thermal imaging can detect nocturnal or camouflaged animals. Citizen science and community involvement. Public participation in data collection enhances monitoring coverage. Examples include bird counts, butterfly surveys, and mobile wildlife apps. Empowers communities and raises awareness. Data management and analysis. Data from monitoring is compiled into databases and analyzed using statistical software. GIS, Geographic Information Systems, helps in mapping species distribution and habitat use. Modeling tools predict future population trends or identify conservation priorities. Challenges in wildlife monitoring. Limited funding and trained personnel. Difficult terrain and remote locations. Animal behavior affecting detectability. Risk of stress or injury to wildlife during tagging. Data interpretation and standardization issues. Key takeaways. Wildlife monitoring is critical for effective conservation and management. A mix of direct, indirect, technological, and genetic methods are used depending on the species and context. Community participation and modern tools like drones, GPS, and EDNA enhance data collection. Challenges remain, but continuous innovation is improving accuracy and impact. Part 12. Wildlife Legislation and Policy. Introduction. Wildlife legislation and policy are essential tools for the protection, conservation, and sustainable management of biodiversity. Effective legal frameworks set guidelines for wildlife protection, regulate human activities, and promote international cooperation. In the face of increasing threats to wildlife, Strong legal backing ensures enforcement, accountability, and long-term conservation success. Objectives of wildlife legislation: prevent illegal hunting, poaching, and trade, conserve threatened and endangered species, protect and manage habitats and ecosystems, regulate use and development impacting wildlife, encourage scientific research and public participation, foster global collaboration for biodiversity conservation. National wildlife laws and policies. Wildlife Protection Acts. Many countries have specific wildlife protection laws. For example, India, the Wildlife Protection Act, 1972, establishes protected areas like national parks and sanctuaries, bans hunting of scheduled animals, provides penalties for poaching and illegal trade. United States Endangered Species Act, ESA, 1973, identifies and protects endangered and threatened species, prohibits harming or trading listed species. South Africa National Environmental Management, Biodiversity Act, NEMBA, governs species conservation, protected areas, and biodiversity access. Forest Acts and Environmental Protection Laws regulate the use of forests and natural resources, support habitat conservation and pollution control. Biodiversity Action Plans, BAPs, national strategies to conserve biodiversity based on international commitments, includes species recovery programs, habitat management, and awareness initiatives. International agreements and conventions. Wildlife conservation is a global concern. Several international treaties guide cross-border cooperation. CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, controls international trade in endangered species through a permit system, prevents over-exploitation of species for commercial purposes. CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, promotes conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use, and fair benefit sharing, encourages national biodiversity strategies and ecosystem-based conservation. Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, focuses on the conservation and wise use of wetlands and their biodiversity. DCMS, Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species, protects migratory animals across national boundaries. World Heritage Convention, safeguards natural and cultural sites of outstanding universal value, including wildlife habitats. Protected Area Legislation, establishes legal categories such as national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, and marine protected areas. Specifies activities permitted or prohibited in these areas. Provides legal backing for habitat protection and management. Enforcement and governance. Wildlife crime control agencies, specialized units to monitor and prevent illegal wildlife trade. Example: Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, India, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Role of judiciary. Courts interpret wildlife laws and penalize violators. Establish environmental courts or tribunals for speedy justice. Community participation. Empowering local communities and indigenous people through community reserves, eco-development programs, and co-management. Challenges in implementation. Weak enforcement and corruption. Inadequate manpower and funding. Lack of awareness among local communities. Conflict between development and conservation goals. Legal loopholes and poor interagency coordination. Emerging trends in wildlife policy. Integrating climate change and biodiversity concerns. Using technology for law enforcement, e.g., drones, smart patrolling. Recognizing wildlife rights and personhood, e.g., legal rights to rivers, forests, or species. Mainstreaming biodiversity in development planning. Role of NGOs and international organizations. Nonprofits assist in law enforcement, policy advocacy, and public awareness. Organizations like WWF, IUCN, and Traffic contribute expertise and resources. Promote international cooperation, capacity building, and community-based conservation. Key takeaways. Wildlife legislation is a cornerstone of effective conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. National and international legal frameworks regulate species protection, habitat management, and trade control. Enforcement, public participation, and adaptation to new challenges are essential for success. Legal systems must evolve with scientific understanding and environmental realities. Part 13. Urban Wildlife and Habitat Fragmentation. Introduction. As cities expand and human development intensifies, natural habitats are increasingly encroached upon, leading to the fragmentation of ecosystems and forcing wildlife to adapt to urban environments. Urban wildlife and habitat fragmentation are interconnected challenges that require innovative solutions to balance ecological preservation with urban growth. Urban wildlife, an emerging reality. Urban wildlife refers to animals that live in and around cities, either permanently or temporarily. These species can range from small invertebrates to large mammals and birds that have adapted to urban ecosystems. Common urban wildlife includes mammals, raccoons, foxes, monkeys, bats, squirrels, leopards in some regions. Birds, pigeons, crows, sparrows, hawks, owls. Reptiles and amphibians, geckos, snakes, frogs. Invertebrates, bees, ants, butterflies, spiders. Adaptations to urban life. Altered feeding and nesting behavior. Increased tolerance to noise, light, and pollution. Use of artificial structures for shelter and movement. Challenges of urbanization for wildlife. A. Habitat loss and fragmentation. Continuous urban expansion leads to smaller and isolated green patches. Disrupts migration paths and gene flow between animal populations. B. Human-wildlife conflict. Encounters in neighborhoods, attacks, and competition for food. Leads to fear, retaliatory killing, or relocation of wildlife. C. Pollution and resource scarcity. Urban runoff and waste pollute habitats. Limited access to clean water and natural food sources. D. Road mortality. High rates of wildlife deaths due to vehicular collisions. Understanding habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation occurs when large continuous habitats are broken into smaller patches due to roads, buildings, or agriculture. Effects of fragmentation. Loss of biodiversity and species richness. Genetic isolation and inbreeding. Increased vulnerability to extinction. Alteration of ecological processes like pollination and seed dispersal. Urban green spaces, wildlife havens. Urban forests, parks, wetlands, and community gardens provide refuge and resources for many species. Ecological functions of green spaces. Habitat corridors for movement. Pollination and pest control. Temperature regulation and carbon sequestration. Mental health and recreational benefits for humans. Conservation in urban landscapes. A. Creating wildlife corridors. Link fragmented habitats using green bridges, underpasses, or tree-lined streets. Ensure safe movement of animals across urban areas. B. Native plant landscaping. Planting indigenous species supports local biodiversity. Attracts pollinators and provides food and shelter. C. Wildlife-friendly urban design. Green roofs, vertical gardens, and permeable surfaces. Bird-safe buildings with fewer reflective surfaces and flight corridors. D. Citizen participation. Urban residents play a crucial role in monitoring wildlife, reducing waste, and supporting local conservation. Innovative solutions and global examples. 1. Singapore, the city in a garden. Integrates biodiversity conservation with urban planning. Features nature parks, green corridors, and biodiversity monitoring programs. 2. Netherlands, ecological bridges. Wildlife overpasses connect fragmented forests and reduce roadkill. 3. India, urban leopards and monkeys. Coexistence models in cities like Mumbai, where leopards roam Sanjay Gandhi National Park. Monkey sterilization and food management to reduce urban nuisance. Research and monitoring in urban ecology. Use of camera traps, acoustic sensors, and citizen science platforms. GIS mapping for green cover and wildlife movement. Studies on urban animal behavior, health, and adaptation. Policy and planning for urban wildlife. Urban development policies should integrate ecological considerations. Environmental impact assessments, EIAs, must include biodiversity data. Urban forestry, pollution control, and waste management policies aid conservation. Key takeaways. Urban areas are becoming critical habitats for many adaptable species. Habitat fragmentation due to urbanization poses major ecological challenges. Green infrastructure, habitat corridors, and community engagement are key to urban wildlife conservation. A harmonious coexistence between humans and wildlife in cities is both possible and essential. Part 14: Ecotourism and Wildlife Conservation. Introduction. Ecotourism is a form of responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of local communities, and involves education and interpretation. It has emerged as a key strategy for wildlife conservation, providing economic incentives to protect biodiversity while promoting awareness among tourists. Principles of ecotourism. True ecotourism is guided by the following core principles. Minimize impact on the environment and wildlife. Build environmental and cultural awareness among visitors. Provide direct financial benefits for conservation. Respect local culture and empower local communities. Deliver enjoyable experiences that are educational and respectful of nature. Ecotourism versus mass tourism. Role of ecotourism in wildlife conservation. A. Generating revenue for conservation. Park entry fees, permits, and donations fund habitat protection, research, and anti-poaching measures. Supports the maintenance of protected areas and conservation infrastructure. B. Creating economic incentives. Local communities benefit through employment, guides, rangers, lodge staff. Wildlife becomes more valuable alive as a tourist attraction than dead as bushmeat or trophies. C. Promoting education and awareness. Visitors learn about ecosystems, species, and conservation challenges. Increased public support for wildlife protection. D. Encouraging sustainable land use. Reduces pressure on natural resources by promoting non-extractive uses of the environment. Prevents land conversion for agriculture or urbanization. Examples of successful ecotourism models. 1. Kenya's Masai Mara. Community conservancies share tourism revenue with local tribes. Encourages traditional custodianship of wildlife and reduced poaching. 2. Costa Rica. Extensive ecotourism network in rainforests, volcanoes, and marine parks. Significant portion of GDP from ecotourism, reinvested in conservation. 3. India, Kaziranga and Periyar. Wildlife safaris generate income for park management. Local involvement in eco-guiding and hospitality strengthens community support. Challenges and risks of ecotourism. Overcrowding can disturb wildlife and damage habitats. Mismanagement leads to pollution, resource depletion, and cultural insensitivity. Commercialization may prioritize profits over conservation values. Habitat modification for tourism infrastructure can fragment ecosystems. Best practices in ecotourism. A. Limit visitor numbers. Implement carrying capacity limits and zoning plans. Encourage off-season and low-impact visitation. B. Engage and train local communities. Ensure they receive a fair share of tourism benefits. Provide training in eco-guiding, hospitality, and conservation. C. Monitor ecological impact. Regular assessments of environmental and wildlife health. Adjust tourism activities to minimize negative effects. D. Use sustainable infrastructure. Eco-lodges using renewable energy, waste recycling, and water conservation. Promote local architecture and biodegradable materials. Policy and certification. Governments must regulate ecotourism to prevent greenwashing. Certification programs like Green Globe, Rainforest Alliance, and Ecotourism Australia verify sustainable practices. Policies should integrate tourism development with biodiversity protection and climate action. Key takeaways. Ecotourism offers a sustainable way to combine economic development with wildlife conservation. It generates funding, creates jobs, and promotes awareness about biodiversity. Success depends on thoughtful planning, community participation, and strong governance. When done right, ecotourism can help people and nature thrive together. Part 15. Future Challenges and Opportunities in Wildlife Conservation. Introduction. Wildlife conservation stands at a critical crossroads. While global awareness and efforts to protect biodiversity have grown, emerging challenges such as climate change, technological disruption, and expanding human activities are testing the resilience of ecosystems. At the same time, innovations and international collaboration offer hope and new opportunities for preserving wildlife into the future. Emerging challenges in wildlife conservation. A. Climate change alters habitats, migration patterns, and breeding cycles. Increases the frequency of extreme weather events, affecting species survival. Forces species to shift ranges, sometimes beyond the boundaries of protected areas. B. Habitat loss and land use change. Agricultural expansion, mining, and infrastructure projects continue to fragment and degrade habitats. Urban sprawl pushes into critical wildlife areas, reducing available space for species. C. Illegal wildlife trade. Poaching and trafficking of wildlife products, e.g., ivory, skins, exotic pets, remain a multi-billion-dollar industry. Organized crime networks often fund these illegal activities. D. Invasive species. Non-native species disrupt ecosystems, outcompete or prey on native wildlife, and alter food webs. Often introduced accidentally through trade, transport, or agriculture. E. Human-wildlife conflict. As people and wildlife share increasingly overlapping spaces, conflict over crops, livestock, and safety is rising. Retaliatory killings threaten vulnerable species. F. Disease outbreaks. Zoonotic diseases, transmitted between animals and humans, are linked to wildlife exploitation and habitat encroachment. Wildlife also suffers from emerging infectious diseases, often exacerbated by climate and environmental stress. Institutional and policy barriers. Weak enforcement of conservation laws. Limited funding and political will. Poor coordination among governments, NGOs, and communities. Gaps in data and monitoring capacity. Opportunities for conservation advancement. A. Technology and innovation. Remote sensing and GIS, real-time monitoring of habitat changes and illegal activities. Camera traps and drones, non-invasive tools for wildlife tracking and surveillance. Artificial intelligence and big data, analyzing complex ecological patterns and informing decision-making. Genetic tools, DNA barcoding, gene banking, and assisted breeding for endangered species recovery. B. Community-based conservation. Empowering local people to manage and protect their environments. Successes in co-managed reserves and participatory forest and wildlife governance. C. Conservation finance and green economies. Emerging tools such as biodiversity credits, eco-certification, and payment for ecosystem services (PES). Green investments and nature-based solutions integrated into climate action strategies. D. Ecological restoration. Rewilding and habitat restoration projects help rebuild degraded ecosystems. Focus on restoring ecological connectivity and functional biodiversity. E. Global policy frameworks. Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework aims to halt biodiversity loss by 2030. UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, integrate wildlife protection with global development. Climate agreements, e.g., Paris Accord, promote ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation. Youth and education in conservation. Growing youth movements and environmental activism are shaping global discourse. Integration of wildlife conservation into education and media boosts awareness and engagement. Opportunities in conservation careers, citizen science, and volunteerism are expanding. Future directions and vision. Integrated conservation planning, aligning efforts across sectors, agriculture, urban planning, water, and energy with biodiversity goals. Cross-border cooperation, wildlife corridors and treaties supporting migratory species and transboundary reserves. Ethical and rights-based approaches, recognizing the intrinsic value of wildlife and the rights of nature. Adaptive management, flexibility in policies and programs to respond to evolving ecological and social conditions. Key takeaways. The future of wildlife conservation is shaped by both immense challenges and transformative opportunities. Climate change, habitat loss, and illegal trade remain urgent threats, while technology, community involvement, and global policy offer hope. Collaboration across disciplines, sectors, and borders is essential. A sustainable future depends on a deep respect for wildlife and a commitment to coexistence.